this was the, I interviewed 10 customers, this was the feedback they got, these are 3 themes I pulled from it. And all of that can be made up stuff, it can be nonsense, but it still shows that if you had that challenge, you would go and interview people and you would go and do it and you'd kind of run through the thought process in order to get there. And that's what it was looking for, whereas the ChatGPT just spat out like, here's some features that you could build that were like all over the place. There was no strategy behind it. And the whole point of an interview, a case study for an interview, is to display your strategy and thinking process. And so like it was technically the right answer to the question, but it completely missed the point.
So I feel like I feel like the worst use case of AI is when you can't tell that AI has given you an answer that you don't want or is correct. Yeah. So the answer may be correct, but it's not what you want. So I feel like if you can't tell that, then you simply can't use AI generally. So you need to like know like what you want, sort of, right? Yeah. Then you could sort of okay, go off that. But if ChatGPT is probably going to give you something like a right answer or a right-ish answer, right? But probably not going to give you the answer you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
the advice I typically give is you want to use the AIs at the beginning and the end of the task. So you want to use it on you want to ask them some questions like, what does a good response to a case study interview question look like, and give me the structure, and how should I think about it for a product management case study? What would the inspectors be looking for? Like, you wanted to help you gather the context up front, and then once you've written something and run through actually taken that and implemented it, you can then run it through to like clean this up or make it more concise or make it more professional, or like change the language, change the copy, tighten it up, reorder it. Like, you can get the feedback, so you can kind of use the chat GPTs are really great at the beginning to get the context of like, what should you be doing? And then a lot of the refining and cleaning up at the end. But there's still a fair bit of middle stuff that it gets quite wrong most of the time, that a person needs to kind of reason through. So I still think we're at the phase where you should definitely be using AIs at the beginning and the end of a task, not to deliver the whole thing, not to deliver the middle.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Okay, so the moderator for today is Abosede. I'm just in charge of ops. So okay. I'm going to hand over to her now. Nice talking to you.
Hello. Hi,
Hi,
Roger.
Abosede.
How are you doing? I'm so sorry for joining you. Lagos traffic.
No problem. I get it.
All right. Thank you, Fortune, for holding forth. Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abosede, and I'll be your moderator for today. Quick one before we start. I would like to know the different levels of people that we have on the call today. If you're an entry-level PM, you can signify that in the chat box. If you're a practicing PM, please also signify years of practice so that we know how to tailor the questions for today's mentorship session. Please drop that in the chat box so that we can take it up from there. Okay, Roger, 15 years, all right.
I'm surprised Roger is dropping.
Okay. That's how we have him here. All right, I see entry level. Okay, I'm still expecting more. Okay, we have 4 years, 3 years.
Oh.
All right, thank you. That gives us direction this evening. So we have a mixture of entry level and then mid-level PMs, also senior level PMs. All right, I'll take it up from there. Thank you very much.
Maybe a quick shout out to Paul. Paul, I don't know everything. I don't know all the answers. If you have something to add, feel free to jump in. And then Richard, this is a group learning session, not.
Hello, everyone. Roger, I follow you on LinkedIn. I love your content. I saw the the event for today and just decided to show up with the camaraderie of other
Cool.
PMs. So I'll be happy to contribute if you guys will listen.
Amandla.
Oh wow, Paul, is this your first time joining us?
Yes, it's my first time.
Good. Welcome.
I'm in South Africa.
Wow, thank you for joining. Happy to have you here. Okay, I'll just do a quick introduction. This is the group mentorship session by the people in product community. We are a community of product managers, right? And we have different programs in the community. And then this group mentorship session is one of them. So we come here, bring a mentor to, answer questions that people have in their product journey. So we're glad to have you here and every other person joining us. Thank you for joining. So Roger, thank you for joining us again. I'll go right into the question. We have a couple of questions here. If you also have questions, please you can drop them in the chat box and we'll take you from there. Please drop your questions. I'll take up the questions that we have here. Roger, the first question I have here is, can you share your thoughts on building psychological safety within your team? Especially when it comes to fostering open communication and idea sharing. I'll come again. Can you share your thoughts on building psychological safety within your team, especially when it comes to fostering open communication and idea sharing rather?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a huge fan of this. I think the first thing to be very cognizant of is the culture and the context in which you're working. I think specifically in African cultures, there's a lot of layers around culturally who can give ideas and suggestions and how that's heard, and there's a lot of sort of the ogre, top-down, big chief mentality, and so if you are a leader of a team, it's really difficult to get suggestions out of people because they kind of feel like you should have all the answers and vice versa. And often culturally, so I've worked with some CEOs and founders who have struggled with that with their team. But also similarly, a lot of the times the team members try and contribute and they just get shut down by the founders. So the first thing is beware of the context that you're trying to think. Sometimes culturally, there isn't a cultural safety thing. So you need to then build from a different level from where you would if there was more psychological safety in the team. But generally, the way which you can foster that is create safe spaces of safe to fail, like safe to fail or safe to make mistakes or silly suggestions. So there's a couple of brainstorming of like design thinking brainstorming techniques that can help you do that. And so often setting up a question, like doing a little warm up or a teaser or something like that, where there are no right answers, they're only silly answers, is a great way to kind of break that and allow people to feel safe that they can actually then share stuff. So just for some ideas, if you're doing ideating or trying to come up with ideas and you feel that people are too conservative, there's some great techniques called, brainstorming techniques called, one of my favorites is called elves, robots, wizards. Thinking like, how would elves solve this problem, or gnomes? How would robots solve this problem, like in the future with all like the fancy technology? And how would wizards, if you could just have magic, how would they solve it? And so by doing that, you allow people to tackle the same problem, but with a different set of constraints. And so by doing that and changing the constraints 3 times, people can come up with a bunch of different ideas. They're all going to be silly. I mean, it's like what elves and wizards do. It's not applicable to what it is. But then when you go back into like, okay, how might we solve this? People approach it with a different frame of mind. And you kind of broken the shackles of that context, of the blinkers that they have when they do that. There's another technique called evil genius, which is if we were an evil genius, how would we prevent this from ever happening? And so it kind of forces you to put the other hat on and think about, like, what would an evil genius do that would prevent anybody from ever being able to do this? You run through a bunch of scenarios and you think that, okay, what could we do to try and prevent those evil geniuses from ever coming to things? So you kind of take a cartoonish approach to the problem as like an evil genius, and then thinking like, okay, well, if we were the superhero, what can we do to try and fix that? And so by doing those sorts of warm-ups, you can often shift the context for people in a specific session to be able to feel safe to share or come up with silly ideas because they've already kind of got that out the way. So that's like in a specific session, if you're wanting to try and break something, think of like actually running an icebreaker like that in order to change people's context and perspectives. In a wider team, like on an ongoing thing, it's just something quite different. It's often about pulling, just actively being intentional that everyone's sharing, pulling ideas out of people. If you don't feel like someone's contributing or they're not feeling like, even if you try and pull it out in a session, they're not really doing it, try have some one-on-one sessions with people, see if you can gather other ideas, bring that back and say, hey, there's been this really great idea that Deborah suggested on the side that she came back to me and it's like, I really think we should run with this. And so giving other people credit of ideas of different shifts, not taking the credit for yourself, brings a psychological safety in your team that they can share with you. And so it's about like not making things wrong, but that sort of culture in your team, that culture of sharing is built up over a long period of time by you intentionally trying to draw on different perspectives or ask questions of the team that enables them to kind of answer you without being wrong or without being made to feel silly or made to feel stupid. And then shutting down whenever somebody does say, oh, that's a stupid idea, to actually shut that down, say, hold on, there's no stupid ideas here, and then find a way to build on that idea. And so another way of turning bad ideas around as like a design thinking technique is to use the yes and. So it's you don't use no but, you use yes and. So even if someone gives a stupid idea, you say that yes, and we can enhance it like this, and you can try and bring it back on. And so there's a little verbal techniques and management techniques that you can use in sessions or in the conversations with your team. But it's going to be 1,000 small actions like that that are going to shift your team towards feeling more psychological safety and accreditation, like giving people credit, other people credit, acknowledging things when things go right, taking responsibility when things don't go well, will help build that team's responsibility and trust in being able to share with you and be able to contribute in a meaningful way. Did that answer your question? Cool.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I know it answers the person's question. Thank you. All right. I'm not seeing any question in the chat here. Please drop your questions if you have any. We're waiting to get them. I'll go right next to the next question here. So the next question says, how do you maintain innovation in your products as it matures and avoid becoming stagnant, especially when the market may start to view the product as legacy or less exciting?
Sure. So innovation is really just doing something new. Innovation is really just thinking about some form of disruption or bringing a different approach to it. Typically, when we talk about a disruption, we talk about a reordering of a value stream. So if I'm a huge fan of value stream mapping and sort of being able to draw your idea, draw your business, like how does the value actually move through? What do you deliver? What do partners deliver? How does the customer experience that value? And a lot of what you're looking at doing is saying, can we remove or change around a step? Can we move a step later? Can we get rid of it completely? Like the way Uber got rid of paying for a cab. One of the most magical experiences when you take an Uber or any kind of thing is just when you get to your destination, you just get out of the car. Before that, you had to haggle with the driver and they had a tally there. And then they want to, like the driver's always trying to get an extra tip or like, oh no, the meter says this, but you need to pay me that. And it was just this complete mess. And now, when you get to the destination, you just get out. They completely removed the job of paying for a cab. It now secretly happens in the background. And so I think there's lots of like those kinds of innovations and shifts that you can do. They don't have to be massive changes, but a subtle shift in how you deliver value or changing the way in which you charge for that value can be like a completely revolutionary approach. I know in the very early stages when you're looking at a pivot, the father of the word pivot was a guy called Steve Blank, and he came up with the steps, the four steps to the epiphany, which is basically customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and business building. Like are the 4 steps, and between those 2 steps, the first 2 steps, if you identify your customers and you can't validate that those are your customers, you go through a pivot. And there's only three things you can change. You either change your product, you change the market, or you change the delivery mechanism of how you get that product to that market. So shifting to a rental model, or a one-time payment, or upfront payment, or post-pay, or have somebody else pay, something like that. And so if you think about that lens to say, if we have an incumbent product, could we change the product, the market, or the delivery mechanism of how we deliver that product to that customer? And what else might we do? You can often find ways of innovating within that same space. So yeah, I mean, and that's the one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is once you're building, once a product's matured, you've just got a bunch of different assets to leverage that you didn't have before. So when you're starting to build a new product, you don't have a very big customer base, you don't have very big distribution. There's a bunch of business models that just don't make sense unless you have those things. But once you have a big chain of customers and you've got a big product, coupling on an insurance product or something else to that, you've now got the distribution, you've got the customers, you've got the relationships, you've got the payment methods, which would normally be barriers for this new product or this new addition to be able to spin off on its own. But now that you're a mature product, you actually can bring new things to the market that you couldn't bring before. So the entire thing shifts as you get through maturity. And innovation just means looking at the problem differently. You're not creating from nothing now. You're now creating on top of, or building on top of, or adapting what you've already got. And often that gives you far more momentum to make much bigger changes than you would have had before.
Wow, that was really insightful. Thank you, Roger. Okay, we have another question here. Please, if you have questions, you can raise your hand and answer your question directly. You can also send your questions in the chat box or use Q&A button. So we have a question here. Let me read it out. Second. How do you manage stakeholders who are over expectant of certain product features? For example, a product recently launched into the market and your CPO is talking about extending it to third party when you have not measured the performance adoption for a month.
Sure, I'm not quite sure what that means. So what does extending it to a third party mean? I think that there's a lot of context that's missing there. And what do you mean by you have not measured the performance? I mean, can you go in and pull the numbers? So, I mean, whoever asked that question, feel free to flesh it out a bit further. If you can add something to that, specifically, what do you mean by extending it to a third party? Or what is not measuring performance? I'll try and answer it as best I can for the information I have. But firstly, you should be able to have access to the analytics. You can have a hypothesis of if this worked, what numbers would go up, how would we measure value, what the value is this new feature delivering, what indicator might tell me whether we're delivering that value, and you can pull that metric. Like, you shouldn't need the chief product officer to get that analytics from you. If you don't have that kind of analytics insight, you should definitely be upskilling yourself to get there and getting access to that data. So, like, not looking at the data in a month, that's 100% on you as much as it is on anybody else on the team. If you need to fix that, I would recommend fixing that. Get the access to the analytics, work out a hypothesis that you have, or a hypothesis of what you think value looks like if you did this, and then just measure that and see how it's actually performing, and then be the one communicating to the team. Drop in the Slack channel once a week. Hey, we launched this new feature. This is where we thought it would be. This is where it actually is on these metrics that matter. Top 2 or 3 metrics. This is the feature, and do it every 2 weeks or every month or every week or whatever it is. Show the graph changing week by week for a new feature. You can totally be the person sharing that information and that analytics out to the team. So you shouldn't be waiting for the chief product officer or somebody else to tell you whether a feature that your team has delivered is working or not. You should definitely be able to have a handle on that. And then as far as extending it to new third parties, like, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. So I just need to close my door. I can still hear you.
All right, I'm hoping that the person drops more clarity on that question. Okay, we have one more question here. Another one. How does one manage a client's major changes in product vision when product has advanced past onboarding?
Once again, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what you mean by advanced past onboarding. Like, are you an agency and you're onboarding the product and now the customer is changing the scope, or are you? Yeah, or is the? Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what that means. Anyone else have a thought or idea? Anyone want to chime in?
Okay, Paul.
Cool. Paul, do you want to go?
I can give it a stab because it's something that I solve quite regularly. So
Okay.
it's one of two things. Either a sales team has sold something that the product team is now left to implement. But if I had to interpret the question, it's the project had already commenced and you're already building something. And during the implementation phase, the client is, maybe the client is like a visual learner and all of a sudden they see either the designs or they're starting to see the buttons or the functions and they're like, oh no, that's not exactly what I was thinking, right? So this happens every time as a product person. One of the product's person's worst nightmare. But the negotiation is always very difficult. So I'll explain what I do, and there's no right or wrong answer. So I try and check if there was any clarity set in any document. So did you have a business analyst that maybe drew up some sort of requirements, or who maybe wrote out the functionality of what's supposed to happen? If I have access, I do look at the contract. The contract, in terms of what was sold, gives you a good idea of the expectation of the client. And then the hard bit is you then need to negotiate with the client, right? So as you maybe not as a junior PM, but as you become more senior or as you start working with the management teams, you then have to learn to give and take. So you can maybe give something that a client would want in terms of a feature or function that you can see he or she has been nagging about. But then you also need to communicate that something will be delayed or something needs to be removed because it's not part of your current product set. That's me trying to interpret the question. I hope it helps.
Yeah, great. I think that's everything Paul said there. There may be one thing I would just highlight is if you are a junior PM, this is not a type of problem you should be dealing with. You kind of need to escalate that up the chain. would be the short answer. But yeah, totally agree with Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Roger. Toby, you have a question? Please speak.
Yes, I do. Just for everybody else, you can always ask your question, just like I want to go ahead and do the anonymous thing. Make it really more engaging. My own question, right? So, my question is kind of a sequel to what you and Paul just talked about, escalating things to the higher hierarchy. There are situations where the problem is coming from the hierarchy. But for example, I have a situation right now where the timeline agreed for a particular project that I am working on is beyond what's possible on the granular level, right?
Sure.
At the high level, at the strategy level, say, okay, get it done in 4 months or 5 months, right? But at the granular level or middle level, where we're looking at things, doing research and trying possible best to keep things to the barest possible minimum viable product, it's just not possible to get it done in 5 months or 4 months, right?
Who said the 5 months?
The higher level people.
Yeah. Wasn't the developers, was it?
So is the engineering lead, like the head of software development for the whole company, that agreed to that 5 months, 4 to 5 months with the executive team, right? He agreed to that, right? But at the granular level, right, we as the product owner for all of this product, I am not realizing that there is absolutely no way we're going to get all of this MVP thing done in 5 months, right?
Yeah.
My question is, how am I supposed to approach that kind of situation? Because it is absolutely certain that he is not going back to the executive today and say, oh, we can't get it done in 4 or 5 months. And I have already tried to see, okay, what can I remove? What can we agree to remove as a product team to say, it will still look like the minimum viable product, but it's not exactly the minimum viable product that he agreed for 5 months.
So the first thing
that's
is,
just not what,
if your MVP, if the very first version that you can ship is taking 5 months, like it's not an MVP. whatever you're calling an MVP is not an MVP.
I honestly agree. Yeah.
If you can't ship it in if you can't ship an MVP in 3 to 4 weeks, you're building too much. You're not. It's not the minimum viable thing. So having said that, for a team to be able to ship things incredibly fast takes a ton of practice, and it takes a lot of intention on how you design the team to do that. And if your team's not set up to do that, you're ultimately going to run into a problem. There's this golden triangle for like all software development: good, cheap, and fast. Pick two. So you can have it good and cheap, but then it's not fast. Or you can have it good and fast, but then it's not cheap. Or you can have it cheap and fast, but then it's not good. But the way that you break this golden triangle is by making it really, really tiny. So if you can reduce the scope, like something has to give, right? So what's happened in your scenario is you set there's expectations have been set. They haven't left enough room for the uncertainty that has crept in, and now everything is staying rigid. And so I always like to use the analogy of when we're building software, it's kind of like builders in the real world building a real house. They almost always run over. They always use too much material or something goes wrong, and like they can't build any building on time. And that's in a world where you know the size of every brick, you know the weight of everything, you know the land, everything is tangible. If you touch it, can be measured. What we're trying to do is build invisible houses in our heads. Like they're basically imaginary houses that are brought to life by computer chips. And we think that we can scope these invisible houses accurately enough to build them on time and on spec without uncertainty. And that entire expectation and that premise of approaching software is fundamentally wrong. So if you've done a plan for 5 months and you haven't left in enough room for the uncertainty, you haven't highlighted the areas of ambiguity or the uncertainty, then you've set yourself up for failure in the first place. So typically what I would look at doing is like try and break the thing is how do you cut it bright? How do you reduce the scope of what you need to build significantly? Toby, can we dive in? Can you share a bit of details around what you're trying to build, and I'll give you a way of what you could ship significantly.
Right. So I actually wanted to speak to that also. Right. Number one, before I answer that question, I wanted to speak to that concept of minimum viable product. Right. So building an enterprise, I find that building a minimum viable product in enterprise, especially like say maybe it's a bank or financial institution that is already a legacy institution, I find that it's not possible to get minimum viable products. It's not possible to get it done in 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, that's what I've seen so far. No matter how much you break it down, it's always
sure. But can you build it for one customer in 3 to 4 weeks?
Oh, okay, so this particular product that we're trying to build is a B2B2B. There are 3 different B's in it, right?
Sure. And can you find one business? Can you deliver something to one business that could deliver it to one more business?
Yes. So that's it exactly. So B2B2B, that's it. So the problem is the product does not work except there's a product for all the B's in the equation.
I fundamentally disagree with that. So I mean, what is the product? What is? Can you tell me what that is, and I'll show you how to.
It's supposed to be a product for financial inclusion, agency banking, right? So there's the distribution businesses, and then there's the agent at the end.
Sure. So you're building an agent banking thing. So one way to bypass that. So minimum viable product is like the viable part is what's important there. Viable means, can we deliver the core value that this product will deliver? Not can we deliver all the features, can we deliver the core value? So what is the core value that you're wanting to deliver to these agents through the thing? Like, what is the fundamental thing?
The fundamentals of financial inclusion is transactions and account opening. Those are
Okay,
the major.
so you want to enable agents to be able to do transactions and account opening, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you if you just did no account opening, just transactions? If people already have these accounts, can you just enable them to do transactions? Would you still deliver value?
We would still deliver value. The problem is executive would never agree to that.
Totally. So the problem here is not MVP and not scope. The problem here is the ego of the executives who can't get their head around delivering something smaller, and now their expectation of that you should be able to deliver everything they imagine in a made-up timeline is now an unreasonable thing, right?
Right.
So typically the way enterprise and business people think about building product and where they get it wrong, why large organizations are so bad at building products and why startups routinely build better products in significant ways, is because they can't ship in small increments. So call it a beta, call it a pilot, call it whatever you like, but that is your MVP, which is the smallest thing that we can deliver that helps our end customer, so in your case the agents, to deliver can we deliver one piece of functionality to the agents that they can generate money? Let's pick one agent network. Let's say one delivery company, or the agent management company. Let's pick one agent management company. Let's pick 20 agents in Lagos and say, can we run a beta we'll manually open the accounts. They can fill out a form, send it to us. We'll manually open the accounts on the back end, and then we send them to, and then we get them to transact on the thing. So we only need to build the transaction layer. The application is going to happen as a form that gets sent to us, and we're going to, instead of the paper form, it's a digital form. It comes to us, and we manually write it in the back end and register the person. Can we just get that right as the minimum? That would be the minimum viable product, right? The minimum viable product is you can help the agents open bank accounts by sending you a form, and you can allow them to manage transactions to make revenue off those transactions, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So the problem is you're stuck on needing you're stuck on a solution, not a problem. And so you can never come up with in fact, let me find you an article. This was one of the first blog posts I ever wrote. It's back in 2016 or something. Where's this here? Oh, it's not even loading. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. October 15th, 2015. So the problem is they've got a hammer, and once you have a solution in mind, this is our solution, and the only way to solve that solution is to build that solution. There's no other way. Anything less than that is not the solution. So therefore, you're not going to be able to get there. But if you can focus on a problem, there's many ways to solve a problem, right? So there's an article for you on how to be a problem focused, not solution focused. If you can reframe it, as I did, to say, what is the value you're delivering? We need people to be able to open accounts, and we need people to be able to we need agents to be able to open accounts and agents to be able to transact. There are many ways of delivering that isn't the full-blown solution. And so the MVPs and steps along that way, we typically have a Wizard of Oz MVP, which is basically a little man in a box that it feels like an automated system to everybody using it, but actually everything's completely manually done on the inside. I built a product for Standard Bank locally in South Africa here called Shift, a digital Forex wallet. And we kind of launched it. By the time we launched it, the bank, we couldn't use any of the APIs of the bank. They couldn't get anything working, not even to check, does this customer exist with our bank? And so what we ended up doing was having an air gap. When the service went live, we had two computers, one from a person sitting in the bank. The one was connected to the Standard Bank network. The one was connected to our system with its own SIM card and internet provided, like cell phone, SIM card, internet. And when applications came in on the one computer, they would manually do a lookup on the other. Is this a customer of Standard Bank? And if they are, they would approve them on the other computer. And there was like a literal air gap with like 2 different computers on 2 different networks in order to be able to deliver it. But that would be like manually. It's like we couldn't get to the point this like using the digital ID API was slowing us down. So we're like, how do we not need that? Well, it's like, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to check if people exist. Can we check if people exist on a different computer? Yes, we can. Great, let's go live. It ran like that for like almost the first 6 months. It did like, I don't know, maybe $10 million of Forex transactions by like accounts approved manually with 2 different computers. Like, and that's fine. It worked great. That's one of the most successful products for Standard Bank right now. So it's like, it's as soon as you're thinking about like, this is our solution, it's very difficult to cut scope, because as soon as you cut scope, you're cutting the solution that you've promised. Whereas if you can shift the conversation to be a problem focused, you can then, it's really easy to cut corners. Another analogy I use is to look at like that, how not to build a product. I've got another article here on the no right way to build a product. But it's, which is looking at like, if you're trying to get from if you're trying to build a car, how like the wrong way to build a car is to build the wheels and the chassis and then the engine and the body and then put it all together as a car, because like no part of that is a car before that. Your customer gets zero value until you build a car. And so if you're trying to build a car, that's the only way to build a car, and it just takes forever and there's fraught with uncertainty. Whereas if you can shift that to be a problem focused, how do we help people get from point A to point B? You can have a skateboard or a scooter or a bicycle or a motorbike, and then eventually a car, and you can iterate your way to a better solution. But a scooter and a skateboard or a bicycle helps a much smaller subset of users get from point A to point B. It's solving the problem. That is an MVP. And what's interesting about that kind of approach is you might end up at the bike and realize people don't want a faster bike. They don't want the motorbike. They want a tandem bike. They want minibuses. We want a train system. You could end up with a totally different solution, like going from a online website that rates how hot your college mates are through to a social network with like all the dead branches of poking and stuff on the way to end up with what Facebook is today. But you would never get there by trying to build Facebook. You would get there by trying to help people connect online and find ways to do it, and then build what's obvious in front of that. And so I like that's the big framing that you need to try and get right, is like ultimately you need to make the scope smaller in order to be able to hit it within time, get remove the uncertainty. But you do that by being problem focused, not solution focused.
All right. Thank you very much for that. One last question, right? So in this kind of system now, where you have multiple Bs, if it's been solution focused, right? If it's been problem focused, rather, it would then mean solving the problem directly for the last B, without thinking about the distribution in between. Right? I mean, if it's supposed to be a supply chain product, for example, where there's the wholesaler, the retailer, and then the last mile person who is the mom and pop. And yeah, ideally, you're supposed to be the product for the wholesaler, the retailer, and then the mom and pop, right? In this case, since the mom and pop guy is the agent at the last end, right, it would mean solving that problem for the mom and pop guy, right? And then figuring out how to solve the problem for the retailer, the wholesaler backwards, instead of building the product for all of them all together at once.
Yeah, it's the same thing. If you're trying to build a marketplace, one of the most difficult ways to build a marketplace is to build marketplaces for the buyer and the seller, build the entire thing end to end, push it live, and hope you can flood both sides to get the marketplace going. That's like a really bad way to start a marketplace. A far better way is to either be one side of the marketplace. So I'm going to hire a bunch of stuff, or I'm going to source all this product and then try and find the demand side, and fill the demand side, and I manually be the supply side. Or you solve an adjacent problem for one of those people. So if you're dealing with like a marketplace of a handyman, can I solve an adjacent problem for them, and then solve to get the handyman on, get that working, and then shift towards building both sides of the marketplace. So if you have a very complex stakeholder relationships and those sort of things, find value that you can deliver to one of the stakeholders without all the other uncertainty, without all the other connections and dependencies, and then see, like, can I build that? Can I get them using it? And then I extend a product to bring another stakeholder in, and then I've got two stakeholders, and I'm helping them both get value, but and facilitating the relationship between them. And then I can bring in a third, and then I can bring in a fourth. But to try and build everything for 4 or 5 stakeholders out the bat, you're destined to fail, because it's so laced with assumptions, incorrect assumptions, that there's so many dependencies that you're just not going to know why it fails. It's just going to flat out fail. Does this sound familiar for anyone working in large corporates?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Roger, do you mind if I add
Yeah,
something?
Paul, go ahead.
I take a different approach. I use the analogy of in a B2B2B, most of the problems or the value that I try and solve is trying to understand the problem and finding a solution that actually satisfies both. And I'll tell you why. It's because the first B is your customer paying for the product, and that second B is the one that's driving adoption and usage. So I use the analogy of toy manufacturing, right? It's hard to make toys, right? Because the parents are the ones who are buying the toy, and the kids are the ones who are using the toy. And so now you got to build this toy, and I'm just using this analogy, where it needs to satisfy the parent who is actually going to be forking out the money, and it's going to also need to be sticky enough for the child to be able to play with. And so in my current line of work, I've had to actually change my perspective. And when looking at one of the stakeholders, and again, this depends on size, and I think we've jumped between enterprises and medium-sized companies and startups, at least in my profession. But in these enterprises, it's helped me as a product person to look at what is a problem that satisfies both. And sometimes it's getting all stakeholders in the room and getting out of their way. And then usually you're able to find, oh, that first business is actually trying to solve a user problem or another business problem. Sometimes that helps. It's very difficult, but it does help when you try and have an arrow that shoots through both, and you're able to define the problem. I think I really like the fact that you took off problem definition over solutionizing. So in defining the problem, if you can find the arrow that goes through both, usually I manage to get more support, at least from my executive teams. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah. So typically to get the people on board who are paying for it, if you can show that the people want to use it and they're getting a ton of value from it, getting the people, like, if the kids absolutely love the toys, it's way easier to get the parents to pay for it. So even if you need to give it to the kids for free to start with, for the MVP, you do it for free, you add pricing in later into a version 1, version 2, and then extend into this other stakeholder. But I have yet to find a real product or real scenario where you can't scope that down. Toby, I don't know if you want to share much here, but I'm happy to set up a separate call with you to help you break the problem down into something far more tangible.
Yeah, absolutely. I would message you.
The hardest part is convincing people in enterprise that spent their entire life building these massive clunky products, who it feels good like good in the ego, to actually build something small that might fail and run an experiment. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest challenge you need to get over.
It's always like building an high. You're building for an high. It has to be high enough to do a brand launch. If there's no brand launch, it's not worth putting the money into.
So call it a beta, call it a pilot, call it whatever you need to get over that, to get past that ego bit first, and say we'll do a big launch in a year's time. But find smaller ways of doing that.
Yeah, perfect.
Or do it under a different brand. That's how we've done it in the past as well. Like with Shift, we actually built it as a completely standalone brand until it was getting enough evidence that, well, people really want this, and then we rolled it back into the Standard Bank brand. So.
Oh, that's perfect. Actually, I can see how the brand side can work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
I would message you further on WhatsApp. I'd like to pass it back. So
you say there. I think she wants to jump in there.
All right. We still have more questions here.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Paul. I'll go right into the other questions that we have here. So the question here says, as an entry-level PM, what skills or areas of knowledge should I focus on developing as a product manager?
Cool. Deborah, I'll drop some links in the chat here once again for you. Links. But yeah, in short, my advice around for entry-level PMs is to try and design your career like a Christmas tree. And so in the early stages, you want to go very deep and narrow. You don't want to try and go too broad. So it's super competitive at the early stage. You want to be able to stand out. So pick one aspect of product management, which is the super broad house, from like dev, team management, analytics, product design, customer research. There's many places to focus, but you want to build a career that, like, for the first 1 to 3 years, to really stand out that you are great at this one part of product, and not trying to be a jack of all trades. By doing that, everyone who needs a junior product manager needs them for a different reason. They want to help with design, they want to help with customer research, they want to help manage the admin of dev teams, or write user stories, or manage Jira, or doing the Scrum process, or whatever that is. There's always a focus. And if everyone applying is pretty general in the experience, but for the jobs, if you create a standout profile that isn't that balanced, actually create an unbalanced profile in the beginning, for the jobs that are looking for that type of thing, you're going to be like head and shoulders above everyone else. And so that's typically how I'd recommend you stand out in the most competitive part of product management, which is the entry level. Once you get to like 3 years experience, that's when you want to start building a wider base and getting experience in the different areas of product and moving around a bit and sort of building a more generalized base of foundational skills to build on. And then you start building as you get like 3 to 6 years, 6 to 9 years, or 8 to 9 years. You want to start focusing again. And when you're focusing, you're starting to think about a specialization of how do I focus on a specialization? How do I define my career and my goals in order to be a top 5 or top 10 in the continent or globally for the specific thing? And so when you're a senior product manager looking to stand out, the best analogy I have is a friend of mine, Rich Mulholland, who uses a streets and avenues analogy. So in Manhattan, the streets all run horizontally and the avenues run vertically. So you can say I'm the corner of 31st Street and 2nd Avenue, and a New Yorker will know exactly where that is. And so what you're looking at is like, what am I at the intersection of? So for me, I'm sort of like early stage startups and early stage product developments in Africa. Like that's kind of my intersection of my profile. I'm trying to get myself to the top 5 in the world on that specific intersection of that specific niche. That's where my specialization is. So that's kind of where you want to try and get your career to be focusing as you're building up the career. But I think about it as a tree. Start going deep and narrow to stand out and get a really solid foundation, and then broaden out and expand up. But I've dropped 2 links in there. Wait, did I? Yeah. 2 links are there. The other one is about like what changes as a product manager levels up. And so that's just thinking about like, what do I need to do as a junior PM? How do I add value? What do I need to learn? What should I be focusing on as a mid-level, as a senior, or as an executive level? How do the thought process and the mental models shift on how you add value to the organization as your career develops? So those are probably 2 that helps you. There's a couple more that can help, but that'd be a good starting point.
Deborah, I hope that answers your question. You should also check out the links as well. Okay, we still have one more question here. How do you stay current with industry development and best practices?
So I mean, it depends on your level. I would typically just try and find there's plenty of good newsletters or podcasts or people to follow on social media, Twitter or Blue Sky. Oh, yeah, I call it Twitter, or Blue Sky or LinkedIn or whatever it is. There's generally quite a lot of content. I would just find somebody that pitches at the right sort of level as you. For anyone who's a mid-senior executive level, I would highly, highly recommend paying the $150 and getting paid access to the Lenny's newsletter and subscribers. It's a Slack group. It's a guy who used to work at Airbnb, but he has like, I learn something every single time I listen to one of those YouTube videos or podcasts or that sort of stuff. It's just really, really mind blowing as far as like, and it's incredibly current and cutting edge on creating strategy, managing teams, metrics, go-to-market strategies, hiring, firing, thinking about design systems. Like, it's the best people in the world communicating that sort of stuff. Like you can't beat that for a source for product stuff. But it's generally more senior. If you're junior, it's probably not going to add as much value. Then you're probably better on focusing. Like I know Jason Knight, One Night in Product, he does some stuff around that. I sometimes follow. There's a couple of other people who Petra Willie, a couple other PM celebrities, or like newsletters and stuff that you can follow to get some interesting stuff out.
Thank you for that. I mean, that was really insightful. I'm a fintech PM, and I do want to follow like industry leaders, people who I know share their thoughts, opinions, practices in fintech, and that has been really helpful for me in my journey as a product manager.
Actually,
Okay,
here's a great idea for everyone on the call. If there's one person or blog post or something that you think is really amazing, drop it in the chat and let's end the call on a high with a bunch of resources.
Yeah, that's a good one. Please drop. Thank you. Okay, there is another question here. Can one become a technical product manager without first being a product manager? I went that route, so I would like to know if it was a bad choice.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think you need to be a product manager before you become a technical product manager. Sorry, I'm just dropping a link in here around tech PMs don't need to code, and there's different ways of getting technical without needing to code. But I think the same thing applies for product management. If you have the technical understanding, picking up the product management skills within your domain should be relatively easy to do. It's just a different way of thinking about it. It's not a I mean, you need to be quite intentional about that. But if you already have an understanding, I'm assuming you're coming from some kind of technical background, like software development or whatever. You've built products before. You've worked in product teams. You might have not done the product management role, but you probably have a pretty good idea of what it needs to be, and you have a deep understanding of technology. So just starting to think through strategy, differentiation, starting to think through like what to build, prioritization. You're probably going to have a pretty good feel of what that looks like as you start pulling the documents together in order to execute on the coordination and stakeholder management side of what you need to do. So yeah, it's totally something you're going to pick up. Most people got into product management from something else. I was an operations manager before this, and a CEO and stuff, and then I moved into that. So everyone kind of comes into product generally from somewhere else. You don't need to start as a PM. It's not the only path to be a PM.
Thank you. Toby, you had your hand raised before. Would you like to ask a question?
I just wanted to ask the person who did that whole process, right? Like, I wanted them to tell us their process, how they did it, right? Going to technical directly and to know if they had any prior coding experience and all of that. Because it's easy to go straight to technical product manager if you already have prior coding experience or have prior technical. If you're already technical first, you can still go to technical product manager. But yeah, I think that Ruja has already done justice to that question.
All right, I'm also curious. I guess that person was likely a software developer or something related to engineering, because going straight to technical PM, without a background would somehow be difficult for the person.
You said that. Cool. The transition from QA to PM. Yeah.
So this person says, yes, I had basic coding experience. I transitioned from QA to PM. Okay, that answers it. All right, so we still have a couple of more minutes here. So I have my own question, Roger. I am currently faced with a situation. I joined a new company recently. It's been like 4 months. And I realized that you have the engineering department, right, controlling most of what is being built. So new features, new product development, they are more like the ones bringing up the idea, right? And so when I got in, it felt really strange to me because I was coming from an environment where product decides what to build, right? Based on the requirements that you've gathered from customers, from stakeholders. And so getting requirements, getting things to build from engineering, it felt quite off for me. And now trying to adapt to that kind of environment, I've been trying to push it, but there's been like a pushback. If you want to like suggest new feature ideas or new product to build, there's more like a feedback, and then they are being like backed by the management. So it's been a tough situation for me trying to be innovative, trying to let them add more features or enhance the user journey, right? But it's been very difficult, and I really don't know how to like navigate that scenario.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. It's really hard to change. As a PM, you feel all the pain, but it's very hard to change a company's reporting structure and decision-making structure from the middle. That it really is something that needs to be top down. The one thing you can look at doing is trying to evaluate the decision-making framework or how they think about what goes onto the roadmap. And so another thing worth highlighting is it's not, I don't subscribe to the school of like, it's this person's responsibility to decide what gets made or that person's responsibility. I think a PM's role is very much, you don't need to be the one making the decisions. You need to be sure that good decisions are being made. And so how can you contribute towards helping better decisions being made? How can you help contribute to how they're evaluating what they are building, what they're prioritizing, and the impact of what they're building and what they're prioritizing compared to what they could have? And so instead of fighting against them and saying, I think you should build this, and they think, no, we should build that, you go there and say, well, what are the things that you're thinking about? Can I help do some research to validate which of those we should prioritize, or how might we measure what you're building, how it's being effective, and sort of shift that instead of it you versus them, saying like they're not going to like doing that evaluation work and that decision work. They're going to like, oh, we think we should build this, it'll be useful. And then you can go like, okay, well, here, let me provide you a framework on how we can evaluate what these things are. And then it becomes a discussion about, is this the right framework, not my idea versus your idea. And then once the ideas go into the framework, they should get filtered through and the best ones come out, whether it's your idea or their idea, who really cares? You just want a process to help find the most valuable ideas and that the most valuable things get built. And so where I would shift my focus to is working with them to make their life easier, take some of the load off their side, in scoping, in evaluating, in what that is, and help provide some frameworks, some measurements to help them think through what we should be building. I mean, who cares whether you suggested or they suggested it? Are you adding value? Is the company adding value? How do you measure whether you're adding value? Did you have an hypothesis of like what's on the roadmap? How do you think that's going to impact the key metrics of the business? And then when you do ship things, are those hypotheses actually fulfilled or not, and that evaluation, and can you create a feedback loop into whether those decisions are being effective or not, or the things they're shipping, whether they're meeting the expectations or not, and how do you help them like be more data driven and less opinionated in that prioritization, and more driven by user needs and activities and data. And you do that by just providing some transparency and process to create that feedback loop to bring data into discussions more than it has been before.
Thank you very much, Roger.
It's hard though.
That was really helpful. I'll really try as much as possible.
There is one very quick question here from Iajima. I just want to maybe answer that. It's like, what are some common mistakes that new entry level product managers make, and how do I avoid them? There's loads of little ones. I don't have time to go into all the details of it. Feel free to ask that in the Slack channel. Tag me in it if you want. I'll create a more holistic response for you as well. I think there's some really good knowledge in the community to answer that. But the one thing I will say is that entry-level PMs often get lost in the process and the activities, and they're not focusing on real value delivery. and a junior PM that can pull himself out to think about how are we delivering value? How do we know if we're doing that? How do we measure whether we're delivering value, and using that as an evaluation of which activities to do? That's going to get you accelerate your career and your product thinking significantly. Too many people they just, I've got this tool and I've got this hammer and I just want to hit everything as if it's a nail, instead of thinking about what are we actually trying to achieve here. And by pausing and just asking yourself, what are we trying to achieve here? What would good look like? What is an outcome that we're aiming for, can actually help you refine which is the right tools and learn which are the right tools, or think critically about your processes and the tools and the systems you're using. And you'll in that way, you gain the experience of evaluation and decision making far quicker. So I would specifically just to ask that question of how do you know what valuable looks like, or what is valuable in every activity that you're trying to do. And then using that lens, you'll be able to pick the right tool and learn much faster.
All right, thank you. Paul here also says, don't say yes to everything. In essence, don't be a yes PM all the time, I guess.
Be a yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you very much, everyone. Special shout out to you as well, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today. So this is the group mentorship session by people in product. We have other programs in the community. We have the interview prep session that happens also on Tuesdays. We have webinars. Webinars take place twice in a month. And lastly, we have weekly check-in calls on Saturdays, 7 to 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. rather. 8 to 10 p.m. rather. So do well to join us. And if you're not a part of the community, the link is right in the chat box here. You can as well join us. We'll be happy to have you. Thank you again, Roger. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's call. We hope to see you in our next session. We'll be having Roger again come March 18th for another group mentorship session. So we look forward to having you all here. Come with your questions. He's very much capable to answer all of them. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Cool. Thanks all. Thanks for your time. Nice chatting.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Paul.